Hi, good morning. Thank you very much for having me here today. You've heard a lot about research today. You'll be hearing a lot more about research today. Basic science research, incredibly important for finding a cure for the future. But today, there are many people that have diabetes, and many times they land in a hospital. But many times, we don't do the best job taking care of people when they land in the hospital. So what I wanted to share with you today is a little bit about some stories of not such a great job, and some stories of maybe some solutions that we've come up with where I work. I thought I just might share a few lines about myself. 20 years as a diabetes doctor, creating and designing diabetes programs for our community. My hobbies, I happen to have 2 kids and a husband, no time for hobbies. Just kidding. I actually love to travel. I take them with me traveling to all corners of the world, but when there, I actually go and look at health systems to see if maybe they have something that they've created that we can bring back here to where we are. So the next 18 minutes, a little bit about the problem, a little bit about the solutions, and then maybe a little bit about the gaps, the needs. You know, I'm hoping there are a few entrepreneurs out there that can hear this and say, I have an idea, and maybe I can formulate the next solution for what we really need for better care. You've heard about the increasing incidence of diabetes across the world. 366 million is what they're talking about now. That number was supposed to be reached in 2025. We've reached it today. When you look at our hospital stays, that number is reflected in the hospital stays as well. Over the last 20 years, the number of people that you see with the diagnosis of diabetes within our hospitals has consistently increased 2 to 3 times the number. When we look at the data, when someone enters a hospital, what should we be doing? Is it okay for them to run blood sugars of 200, 300, 400? Not necessarily. According to some of this data, they seem to do better for mortality or death rate if we actually control their blood sugars in a closer to normal range. How are we doing? Are we actually doing that? Actually, not really. And I thought maybe I would exemplify this not by more data, but with a few stories. Because it seems like I can show data over and over and over to our operations and administrative folks, and I can ask for change, but it doesn't always result in change. So my first story, you may know this gentleman is one of the organizers of today's program, happened to be the chairman of our board several years ago, type 1 diabetes for over 50 years, had an unfortunate incident on Christmas Eve a few years back, fell and broke his patellar kneecap, landed in our hospital, and required surgery for this. Maybe a preview of what was to come during that hospitalization first came when he entered the hospital floor and the nurses took one look at his continuous glucose monitor and said, "You've got to take that off. There's no way you can keep that on. What is that? Is that a pump? What does it do?" They had no clue. When you enter the hospital, your lifestyle changes a little bit. You're sitting around a lot, not getting a lot of exercise. The food they feed you is not necessarily low carbohydrates. You're under a lot of stress, and you're getting drugs such as steroids, which can increase your blood sugar. All those things increase blood sugar. So we have to adjust and be very attuned to how well we can give insulin, how to adjust it. Do our nurses and our doctors know how to do that very well? Well, as David example shows, not really. He was running blood sugars of 300, 400, 500s. They weren't testing him as often as they should be. And when they called the surgeon to come in and figure out what kind of insulin to give him, the surgeon wasn't really sure. Does the story end there? No, he went to surgery, came out of surgery. When you come out of surgery, you don't get any food to eat until everybody knows that things are going okay. Traditionally, in someone with diabetes, type 2 diabetes, you probably wouldn't give insulin if they're not eating. But in type 1, if you don't give insulin, you could run into severe problems. Diabetic ketoacidosis, blood sugar start running high, very dangerous situation. David, in his drugged out state with morphine, still understood that when they did the order of no insulin, this was a problem. And as his blood sugars started climbing up, at that point he insisted to his daughter that happened to be in the room, "You better go get some insulin of my own, and I'm going to start injecting myself." Throughout his hospitalization, he continued to do that, tested his own blood sugars, gave himself his own insulin, and finally was discharged. I have another story. I actually have three altogether. Julie, another lovely young lady that I met shortly before she went away to college. I had made a promise to her mother that I would be available if Julie needed some help with her type 1 diabetes. Well, sure enough, I got a call one evening. And the call was from a cell phone in an emergency room in her little cubby where she was. And she's like, Athena, I'm in the emergency room. I knew I was sick. My blood sugars were running high for the last 2 days, and I came here because I didn't have any place else to go for them to help me. She said, but they're about to give me 15 units of insulin, and I know that's going to drop me through the floor. What can I do? I was kind of lucky. The physician there was actually willing to get on the phone with me, and we walked through what the care and the therapy should be, and we actually got her out okay. When Julie returned to San Diego, and actually had a similar episode and landed in one of our hospitals, I was thinking, oh, all right, we'll be able to take care of her. But unfortunately, when she landed in our hospital and one of the nurses came to give her her insulin, Julie said, I take Novolog. And the nurse said, this is Novolin. And of course, it's the same thing, but it really isn't. They actually brought her a tray of food afterwards to eat that was loaded with carbohydrates and sugar and bagels and orange juice, and exactly what you don't want to give someone with diabetes. So we have a problem. Julie is a very bright young lady, and as an aside, you might find her one day at the World Series of Poker in Las Vegas on one of the TV shows there. She's very bright, knows exactly what she needs, but someone wasn't listening to her. My last story is Chris. He also lives here in San Diego. And I wanted to be able to share that these stories don't only happen in our hospitals. They actually happen across the country. This is not a problem unique to San Diego. Chris has also had type 1 diabetes for many years and was in the Bay Area. Had a hypoglycemic episode where the paramedics were called. They arrived. His insulin pump had been going, and the paramedics had never seen one of these, didn't know what to do, and wanted to cut it off with a pocket knife. He said, stop! That's giving me the only insulin my body can produce, or can't produce in his case. Don't cut it off. They took him to the hospital, where subsequently the physicians that were there also weren't sure what to do with his pump and wanted to remove it. He again insisted to keep it on. They sent him up to the hospital floors where the blood sugars were running high, and in a 230-pound man, they only wanted to give him 2 units of insulin at the time to help drop his blood sugars. Completely inadequate. Chris, by this time, was figuring he might have to pull a David. He started injecting his own pump insulin, measuring his own blood sugars, and around midnight called up his wife and said, Lorraine, we got to get out of here before they kill me. He left. His story also, unfortunately, doesn't end there. A few months later, he required a kidney transplant. Was at a prominent hospital up in the San Francisco area. When you have a kidney transplant, you again require very high doses of steroids, which drive your blood sugars up. You need a lot of insulin to take care of this. And again, he was getting 2 units of regular insulin every time he had a high blood sugar. So he tried his same trick. Maybe I can inject my own insulin to take care of it myself. Except this time, they confiscated his insulin and his syringes and locked him away in the basement somewhere. So he did have the remaining hospitalization running on the high side, suboptimal care of his blood sugars. We should be doing better. These are the examples. All of these happened 3 to 4 years ago. And we have put systems in place where we are now trying to do better. When we looked at our hospitals, we see 20,000 patients every year throughout the Scripps system that have a diagnosis of diabetes. On the outpatient side, it's about 15,000. We know we're not identifying these patients appropriately. We are not managing them appropriately. We're not, when we're sending them home, connecting them with their primary care physician so that they understand what happened in the hospital and what needs to happen on the outpatient side. We also don't necessarily do an optimal job before anybody ever enters the hospital to ensure that they're cholesterol, blood pressure, sugar are all under control, that they get self-management education to help treat any depression they might be dealing with. In other words, taking care of the whole picture. Do we have any guidelines on what we should be doing? And we do. There's a whole room full of people that you'll be hearing from today, many of whom sit down and help develop these guidelines. They tell us that we should be identifying anybody with diabetes that walks through our hospitals. The fact that we didn't identify 1/3 of people that had diabetes means we're just missing the boat completely on even beginning to take care of them properly. They tell us we should be checking a measurement called hemoglobin A1C. It's a 3-month measurement of control, not necessarily because it'll guide us in our care of diabetes in the hospital, but at least to let us know what we should be telling them once they go home. We know that we need to be achieving certain targets, and ADA gives us those guidelines of what those targets should be. It tells us how often we should be checking blood sugars while they're in the hospital, and it also tells us we should probably not be using any forms of pills in the hospitals for blood sugar control. Insulin is the way to do it, and not this traditional sliding scale approach in which we wait for someone's blood sugar to go to 400, then we treat them to go to 100, then we wait for them to go up again and we treat them again. We actually have ways to prevent and be proactive in our treatment, and we should be doing that in a hospital environment. So what our hospital did about 3 years ago is they said, we do have a diabetes organization. Let's ask that organization to create protocols, train teams, standardize the approach, so that what we do throughout our 5 hospitals and our 25 clinics all meet the standards that have been recommended out there. Easy, right? We realized, we took this on, we realized we really needed 3 things in order to achieve this: technology, manpower, and education and training. Technology. The first step is collecting blood sugars and data. If you don't have data, how do you know what to do? You need to have what the blood sugar is, you need it frequently, you need it quickly, and you need to be able to act on it. So the blood sugars right now are collected with point-of-care meters, those little blood glucose meters that Steve showed you. Those numbers, when they're docked, they go to a computer, and what happens to that information? Well, we found out our information was going down to the basement in a computer and then never going anyplace else. So the nurse might be able to act on it, but we could never create reports to say, how do we improve what we're doing? How are we doing now? And if we make changes, can we do better? We were able to put in place a coordinated system that gathered all this information in one place, create reports, send it back to our physicians, our hospitals, every single floor and every individual physician, so they could understand how the changes we put in place were now affecting their numbers. Manpower. Well, if you don't have your experts right next to you to be able to help you understand how to do this better, you're not going to be able to accomplish this in the huge numbers of environments we're talking about. So we help put in place specialized nurses at every hospital to do both diabetes education and to assist physicians on how to calculate doses, how to use the latest doses of insulin right there by their side. And the last thing we did was create education and training programs. So guidelines, protocols, what's the right insulins to be using, those became mandated now throughout all 5 of our hospitals. We had to train over 3,000 nurses, 500 physicians, 100 pharmacists, and over 100 dietitians. That's the entire team that takes care of you when you enter the hospital. The sorts of things we trained them on: when someone says Novolog and it's not Novolin, here's the reason. You learn that. When someone says you shouldn't be using a sliding scale, you should be using a little bit of background insulin, a little bit of insulin for what you're eating, and a little bit of insulin for when your blood sugar is high, this looks complicated because it is, but we have to train you because this is the way to do it. We train them how fast-acting insulin works. It works as a peak with every time you eat. When you use the insulin properly, you can actually match it up. Not when you use older insulins and they don't match up with what you're eating. One of the last things we taught them was food. You know, this is an American meal. There's different ways you can give food in a hospital environment. This one actually happens to be a Japanese meal. and this one a French meal. Whoops. Lots of different carbohydrates, proteins in these meals that affect blood sugar. We standardized the amount of carbohydrates in every single meal at the hospital if you have the diagnosis of diabetes so that your insulin could match the carbohydrate in your meal. We embedded this in every order set that we created with a check box fashion to make it as simple as possible. We standardized the education booklet that the nurses can give the patients as they're walking out the door, Spanish and English. So by centralizing this process but then dispersing it, we were able to create one uniform approach to diabetes care. Are we doing it perfectly? No. But we're getting there. Are there needs still? Yes. Some of the things that I see as gaps, rapid, real-time, seamless data transfers. Wouldn't it be great if I could use that continuous glucose monitor, wirelessly send that information to a central location? Maybe we even have one person that's looking at the results and saying, this person should get this much insulin, this person should get this much insulin, and keep it going. Accurate glucose meters. Our glucose meters right now are 20% inaccurate. We have to do better than that. When I traveled to Europe and talked to my colleagues, they said we do not use those kind of meters in our hospitals. We only use meters that have a 5% inaccuracy rate. The lab has a 3 to 4% inaccuracy rate, so you're getting very close at that point. Our hospital system just made a $1 million investment to convert to those kind of meters. Every hospital in the US should be doing something like that. The last thing, simple, immediate access to experts. Can we pick up that cell phone? Is there another way to telecommunicate? If you can't get your expert right there next to you, is there another way to bring them into the room with you? So I'm just going to finish up with my last story, Leo. Leo's a very simple story. When you go to our hospitals, you see very complicated patients. But Leo is a success. You can see Leo's from Brazil, beach a volleyball player, was out there doing one of his tournaments one day and noticed he was having frequent urinations, going, what's going on? Landed in our ER, and sure enough was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and was admitted actually. During the admission, he received exactly the insulin he needed very quickly along with the fluids. The nurses from our teams were there to see him, take care of him, educate him, and actually within 24 hours he said, I am ready to go, I feel good. His blood sugars were excellent, and out he went. He then followed up with me at the Diabetes Institute. We continued to educate him. He was so motivated that he used all sorts of devices, technology, transmitted information back to me, was very successful. And he said, Athena, 1 week after his discharge, he said, I played in a tournament last year and I won that tournament. He said, I want to play that again, it's next weekend. I said, there is no way you can do that. And he said, I'm going to do it. He went out there, we discussed how he should manage his blood sugars. He went out there and won the tournament up in Long Beach the following weekend. So this is what it takes to really have a successful stay. All the elements we talked about, technical support, good teams, education training, and your physician management. Leo is one of our success stories. We hope for many more. Leo was asked to go back and train the national women's volleyball team in Brazil. He'll be in London in 2012 out there, and he is truly our cover story for successful treatment of diabetes. I'll just finish up with this. I learned a little bit of history, just like Steve showed you a little bit of history. 1924, the year insulin was discovered, the Scripps Metabolic Clinic opened its doors down here in La Jolla on Prospect Street for one reason, which I did not know about until recently, and that was to treat diabetes. So we've returned to our roots, I think, with what we do at the Scripps Whittier Diabetes Institute. We really have taken it upon us to do the best job possible to manage diabetes, and hopefully with a few of the things I've showed you, you've learned the progress we've made over the last 3 to 4 years. So thank you.